All right, let's work on some hip flexor stretch today. Again, this would be one of your go-to basic style hip flexors. There are some important cues, okay? Once again, not very or very easily overlooked, so be intentional about this. Now, just a caveat, I do say it's a hip flexor stretch, and it is. But if you have tightness or feel tightness in your hip flexors, just know that most often it's not due to a flexibility issue in the hip flexors. It's probably more due to the imbalances in your mobility and the strength in the posterior side, and not your hip flexors being inflexible. That said, there is a shortening, okay, of the hip flexors that does occur because of the way the amount of time we spend sitting. But again, just flexibility isn't going to fix the issue. However, here I'm going to show you the hip flexor stretch, so that if you are going to do it, this will be one of the more accessible methods to do it. There is what we call the couch stretch. That's I think a little bit too much to bring into a for everybody month. All right, so. And if this seems hard for you too, don't worry about it. Take it in baby steps, okay? The only prop that you might want is something to hold on to, okay? And you could experiment with this. So it could be just something nearby to tap onto, or you could actually use like a broomstick. And I'm just gonna grab what I happen to have in front of me, which is this mace, but this actually works well because it stands up. Okay. We'll see if we're going to use it or not. So our first setup is going to be in that kind of probably familiar pose that you've seen with the hip flexor stretches. I'm just going to give you one little warning about what to fix, okay? So usually that hip flexor stretch will be, you'll see the sort of a 90-90 setup, and then people just leaning really a lot into this. And what happens if you see from the side, if you do that, okay, there's a lot of arching going on, okay, the way I'm doing it here. And I'm actually not feeling that much in the hip flexor. So our first setup will be to initially get into that 90-90. And once again, as before, and as usual, your first job is to get really, really tall, okay? And this is going to be an active stretch. Now, in order to give us a little bit of a reach, we are going to then get our front leg out of 90-90 and step it forward, okay? Now, the back leg is your working leg, all right? So, step it forward outside of 90-90. Once again, get tall. This time we want a posterior tilt. So, one of the things that you could just think about is squeezing that working glute. So our working leg, let me switch. So our working glute will be the one on the bent leg. So squeeze that as hard as possible before you take your whole body forward. Again, not the upper body, okay? Not just dropping the pelvis into it. You want to think about more of a shift of your entire body, head to tailbone, straight forward first while keeping that squeeze on, okay? Now, once that squeeze gets a little bit too intense, you can go ahead and relax into it. You could take whatever you're holding onto and actually give a little bit of a downward pressure, okay, to cue your body into that downward position, okay, and sort of go ahead and let the hip drop into it. But you want to make sure that you keep that pelvis tucked, your pelvis tucked, your glute on, okay? Now when you come back and release out of it, and if the knee hurts, just put another cushion underneath. You can relax, and then once again, squeeze that working glute as hard as possible. That automatically is going to put you into a slight posterior tilt. You should feel a nice stretch, or full hip extension. Basically, your from the front of your pelvis to the top of your thigh should be just a straight line, okay? Then take that whole upper body, take the pelvis, everything together, and shift forward, okay? And then when that gets really tiring on that glute, then you could sort of drop into it, okay? And hold that for a spell, all right? And again, whatever is comfortable with you, you could reposition your broomstick or tap onto the wall on either side, okay? But the big thing is that we're doing an active stretch. So this one is where we are using reciprocal inhibition by squeezing the glutes so our hip flexors should relax, okay? And if it doesn't, then make sure you're set up correctly, that you're 90-90 on the working leg, working glute, working hip flexor, that you give yourself leverage here by stepping the foot out, okay, on the front side, and then squeezing that glute, that working glute, and then you could relax into it after, okay? So we're basically alternating in this manner the focus of the squeezing of the glutes and then the focus of the relaxation into the hip flexor, okay? That way too, you're trying to work on this in an active manner and practicing that same being upright so that we are using the position of our pelvis as basically the landmark from which we start our moves, okay? Because so many times people just want to drop their head, drop their shoulder, reach all the way forward, and yeah, you're going to feel a stretch in some manner, but this way we're actually increasing the flexibility and the strength in a matching manner over time, where you actually will get permanent gains if you're doing this for 2 to 4 minutes 3 to 5 times a week, okay? That's going to give you faster, more functional results than holding a static stretch where you're forcing into beyond your comfort zone, beyond the strength for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time, okay? Trust me on this one. And either way, it takes a lot of patience, but at least we're getting a lot of functional movements at the same time, cueing ourselves, you know, learning the hip position, right? How to control your hips to go from anterior to posterior, feeling how that contracts the glute, contracts the hip flexors, contracts the abs, how to keep it in line from head to toe. We're getting all that work in without just reaching as far as you could go. All right, give it a go.